All right, well, we'll get things going. My name is Mark Landers, and I'm going to be hosting today. We've got Paul Beard also on the line from across the pond in the UK, and we want to take a few minutes and just kind of walk you guys through UK pension strategies for expats in Canada. We're Alexander Beard. We're hosting the organization here. And myself, I'm based in Canada. Paul's based in the UK. I'll take you through a few of the items that we're going to walk through today, a bit of a brief agenda. Um, so we're going to take a few minutes and just introduce Alexander Beard as an organization to you, just so you kind of understand our background and kind of the work that we do. We're also going to talk a little bit about what we call the UK Pension Challenge. And I think that for anyone who's tried to manage their UK pension from Canada, you'll realize you've probably experienced some of those things. We're going to talk a bit about the reason that Paul and I kind of came together, which is this idea of worldwide wealth management. So the idea of having boots on the ground in Canada, as well as the UK presence to manage and look after opportunities. We're going to talk about a few different strategies that can be implemented to help deal with the pensions, things to consider, and then obviously next steps if you want to have a little bit of a follow-up or sort of go through things. So I'll take a few minutes and I'll just pass it over to Paul. And Paul, I'd love for you to just walk us through Alexander Beard and how you got started and where you're at today. So go ahead, Paul. Welcome.
Sure. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar. Just to give you a brief background to the company I founded in 1987, we were initially a financial planning business to the music and entertainment industry, and that actually led indirectly to our expertise built up over probably the last 30, 35 years of our history, because many of our clients were globally mobile and moved to different parts of the world, and we wanted to continue to look after them. And they left assets behind in the UK, predominantly pension schemes, but other investments as well. And again, they wanted those things looked after. So we decided that this was a niche market for us and that there weren't many people who were doing this on a cross-border basis. There were many financial advisors in different parts of the world who were basically product selling, but we set out to do a full financial planning service, both initially and on an ongoing basis, and to try and pull together for clients who had investments in different countries, one level of service and one level of reporting.
Sounds great, Paul. Appreciate that. And maybe you could just touch on the fact, I know you've got some offices in a few other countries as well, so you've got experience in a
Yeah,
few different parts of the world. So talk about some of your other offices, maybe how long they've been around for, since Canada is a little bit of a new venture for us. So
sure. Our first office was in the United States. That's now in California, and that again was primarily driven by a lot of our music and entertainment clients who moved to work in California, and that's our longest standing overseas office for over 20 years. We also opened an office in Australia just about coming up for 20 years ago now. There's a huge population of British expats in Australia, and a lot of them were very interested in looking at how they took their pension benefits when the time came. And even though it wasn't in place at the time, the ability through the Recognised Overseas Pension Scheme rules, known as ROPS, came into being and allowed us to transfer UK pensions to Australia. So that's how that business developed, and that's now based in Perth. We have a small financial planning practice in South Africa, and we have an employee benefit practice and a financial practice, financial planning practice in Ireland as well.
okay. No, great. And yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and how I kind of fit into the Alexander Beard family here per se. But so I've been in business about 20 years, financial services here in Canada. We've got a practice called Han Landers and Company. And when Paul and I connected last year, It sounded very much like this expat work and these Canadians that used to be in the UK that had these assets. They really needed a planning focused approach. They needed someone that had technical expertise. As when you start to look at different tax rules and regulatory regimes, and it sort of seemed very similar to the work that we've done. So, our firm in Canada, we've done a lot of work with private company owners. So we had a good understanding of technical matters and unique circumstances. So it seemed like a really interesting combination and partnership when we explored it. And yeah, ultimately, I think our main goal is really to make sure that in the case of UK expats in Canada, making sure that, whatever UK assets they have integrate very, very well with their future goals, plans, and their Canadian assets. And we'll talk a bit more about how we try and do that. I'll just move along a little bit here, Paul. Any other thoughts before we kind of get into, the pensions themselves? What do you think? So,
Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
okay, fantastic, fantastic. So let's move it along here. So I think that and I'll start this off kind of from my Canadian kind of domestic experience. So Canadians here, if you worked at a large organization and had a pension plan, most pension plans, if you worked, let's say, as a teacher, or maybe if you're a municipality or like a large manufacturer, they have these pension plans. And quite honestly, at the end of the process, if you leave your employer, you have the ability to keep the pension with your employer, or you have an ability to move it into an RSP. That's kind of if you're working with a Canadian employer. So when Paul kind of brought me up to speed on the challenges that somebody has when they were in the UK, now they're in Canada, and some of the challenges that they're facing, it really was surprising because obviously people want to have the control and ability to, kind of manage their retirement income and assets where they're living. So maybe Paul, just kick it off a little bit. Like what do you think the biggest, challenges
I
are, So,
I think probably the easiest way to do this, Mark, is to go through the list of questions that you've prepared there because it pretty much covers the whole situation.
yeah.
Um, One of the difficulties that clients have is they move overseas and looking after their pension that they've left behind is very rarely one of their priorities, nor should it necessarily be so. So over a period of time, they tend to lose control because they lose touch with the pension provider. And I know this has happened in many other countries, but certainly in the UK, in the years that I've been in the business, the amount of consolidation of pension companies has been enormous. So somebody starting off with a pension 30 years ago with an insurance company could well find that that pension has gone through 2 or 3 transitions and that they don't know actually now who the product provider is. So you could certainly describe that as a loss of control. So quite often we get contacted by people through our website or through our various professional introducer relationships, and they say, we've got this client, he's got a couple of pension schemes, some have 2, 3, or 4, and they ask us to look at if we can consolidate those into one more easily manageable arrangement, particularly in companies where there is no option to transfer, and I'll come on to that in a second. Tax inefficiencies, well, in the UK, as many of you may know, you can take a tax-free lump sum from your pension when you reach retirement age, but quite often that tax-free lump sum, what's recognised in the UK, is not recognised in other countries. So there's a situation where if you can transfer, retaining or protecting the tax-free nature of the fund is an important consideration. The third one is currency risk, and again, not something people necessarily first think of. If you are going to keep your pension in British pounds and you're in Canada or America, for example, then if you come to take the benefits from that pension, your annual income can fluctuate because of the underlying exchange rate. Now, of course, that could be better, but it could be worse. And I think the single most important thing for me anyway, is when it comes to pension income, is certainty. So being able to convert those funds into Australian dollars, American dollars, or Canadian dollars, for example, we believe is a really good thing to do, just to eliminate that currency risk. In terms of inheritance complications, well, um, I don't know how many of you follow the news back in the UK in terms of what's happening with the economy and the Labour government's taxation programme, but inheritance tax is becoming more and more of a problem because pension funds in the UK are no longer excluded from inheritance tax as they used to be. So an important consideration, and this comes up regularly in inquiries that we get, is how do I avoid inheritance tax on my UK pension? Well, one of the ways of looking at that is moving it to the country in which you live. Lack of flexibility and access. We've had an inquiry only in the last 24 hours where we have a client who's got an opportunity, in fact, an obligation to turn their pension fund into a guaranteed annuity. Now, the changes in the, or so they think, the changes in the rules in the UK over the last few years allow people to transfer out of that type of arrangement and into a more flexible personal pension arrangement. But the regulator here is very strict about that, and he just does not allow an easy transfer process. Anybody with a fund over £30,000 must take financial advice. That is one of the key regulations in the UK. And being a company with the necessary permissions from the UK regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, and having a team of people in our expat division, a team of advisors who are also holding the necessary pension transfer qualification, we're able to give that advice where a lot of advisors are not. And then we can work with firms like Mark that Mark runs in Canada, so that they can provide the other end of the arrangement and look at the best type of Canadian retirement plan that those funds can be transferred into. So flexibility and access are very, very important. Um, Poor communication. This is an interesting one. It may not seem so, but a number of companies in the UK will simply just not deal with people who live overseas. And again, a fair number of our inquiries are based upon that frustration because they're told that they can't, for example, give advice or sorry, give instructions to the insurance company or pension provider on changing their funds. So there are communication problems, which also goes back to a point I made earlier on the fact that some clients have seen their pension fund transition 2, 3, or 4 times, and they don't actually know who the current provider is because that current provider maybe didn't pick up the fact they'd left the country, or in some cases, the clients don't tell the provider as well. That has to be said. Finally, I touched on this a few minutes ago. There are a lot of advisors outside regulated countries who are giving poor advice on pension transfers simply to product sell an alternative. We are fee-based financial advisors. We have no product bias, we have no fund bias, and the advisors at both ends, both at Horn Landers and at Alexander Beard, are experienced and qualified and able to give that advice. So I think that just about covers off that slide, Mark, I hope.
Yeah, no, that very, very well delivered. Thanks for that, Paul. And I think the one thing I'm finding here in Canada as well, when we talk about qualified advisor relationships, is I think that there are some advisors in Canada that are licensed in Canada that are marketing the potential possibility of transferring UK pensions to Canada. The challenging thing that exists, and Paul can speak to that, is you can't if you're a Canadian advisor, you need to liaise with somebody who's licensed in the UK in order to go through some of the administrative challenges and the regulatory hurdles. It's not just like a one-sided piece of the puzzle. So I think what makes us very unique in the Canadian marketplace is because we've got this partnership between us and Canada and Alexander Beard in the UK. We can satisfy the UK regulatory requirements on these transactions, and then obviously liaise that with the Canadian rules and regulations. And I'll be honest, I mean, sometimes it doesn't make sense for somebody to transfer their pension out of the UK. Maybe it makes sense to keep it in the UK. And with a lot of Canadian advisory firms, they're only going to get compensated if they move the money to Canada. It's not in their best interest to kind of keep it with the pension provider in the UK. But because Alexander Beard has got some, some different types of options, we have UK options where we can manage the pension, and there's also Canadian options. So it's a nice opportunity there for sure, So,
And
um,
that point, Mark, is really, really important. The UK regulations are very, very strict. Only companies regulated with the FCA that have the necessary permissions, which is something you have to apply for and be approved for, and only their advisors who are specifically qualified in pension transfers are allowed to give that advice. So a number of clients come up against this when they contact the insurance company and say, I've moved to Canada or Australia or whatever, and I'd like to take my pension with me. And the insurance company or pension provider will not deal with them because they have to have advice.
makes a lot of sense. And the for those of us who are in the advisory space in Canada, it's like these kind of things are even higher. There's more regulation in the UK than there is in Canada around financial advice, and I've been learning a lot about this through Paul over the last year or so. So that's great. But yeah, thanks for that. Let, I'll touch on this a little bit, and Paul, I'll maybe discuss it. But I think the key piece that was really exciting for us as we partnered with Alexander Beard was this idea that a lot of people in Canada that we have assets in the UK, it's sometimes it's a one and done. Sometimes they've got one pension, we're just transferring it over, and all of their assets are now in Canada. But there's a lot more of these circumstances where they have some of their assets in Canada and some of their assets are in the UK. So it's really about trying to coordinate the two pieces. And I know even in Canada, a lot of large financial institutions they will not deal with people that are overseas. We had to struggle. There's only a handful of providers. Like if Paul has somebody in the UK and they have some RSPs back in Canada and they would like someone to look after them, there's only a small list of carriers in Canada where we could actually set up an RSP contract for a non-resident not in Canada. So those are just some of the challenges that are out there. If somebody wants to move a pension from the UK to Canada, there's very, very few institutions that will accommodate it, right? So I think it's really it's not so much about a product or an account, but it's about coordinating kind of worldwide what's really appropriate. Paul, you had a good comment earlier about income needs, and you said if you talk about things like currency and retirement income, certainty is important. And obviously, if your life's in Canada or your life's in the US, maybe British pounds isn't the right currency to be getting your monthly cash flow. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's to me that's fundamental. You should take your pension income in the currency in which you live,
Yeah,
and to have it endangered by uh, foreign exchange fluctuations is an uncertainty that for me personally would be unacceptable. Having said that, you always have to say that there's another side to the coin, and that is that people who don't want to fix it and want to keep it more fluid may, of course, in the future receive more income if the exchange rate moves in their direction. So you always
true.
have to point that out to a client. But most people, I believe the overwhelming majority of people, they want certainty with their pension because that's the income they're going to live on for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. No, makes a lot of sense. I know one of the people that signed up for the webinar, they had a question about tax efficiency. So,
Mm.
what are your thoughts around, if somebody elects to have some money maintained in the UK as well as money maintain in Canada. Any thoughts?
It again very much depends on what that asset class is. But if we're sticking with pensions on this particular question, then it's very difficult as a principle to justify leaving a pension fund back in the UK if you are permanently resident in a country that can accept an incoming transfer.
Hmm.
Um, because the tax efficiency of the UK pension in terms of particularly the lump sum just does not apply in other countries. Some
Hmm.
countries, due to the dual taxation treaty, like the United States, they do accept it. But again, over the years, we've seen that challenged by local tax inspectors who say, no, it's taxable. And we've had to point to the tax treaty to persuade them otherwise. So we don't give tax advice per se. We are not tax advisors, but we do look at the tax implications of any advice we give. And
Hmm.
that is not always, but that is often a question that people look to.
One other question, this is a little broader than just pensions, but do you see, I think about, we're in the insurance space. Is there situations you've come across, Paul, where people have insurance in different countries and they've moved? And I guess there's a bit of thinking to be
Yes,
done there.
that isn't a common um, area of business for us, other than in our employee benefit division.
Hmm.
But yes, there is certainly a situation where if somebody is emigrating, then one wants to look at what life insurance they have back in the UK and whether or not the life insurance company will continue to cover them. In most
Hmm.
cases, they will, as long as they're notified. But
Hmm.
if it's possible to buy a life insurance policy of equivalent value in Canada or any other country that you might be going to, then that is always worth considering, if
Hmm.
only to give you peace of mind that what you have now is better than what you could obtain in the country you're going to. So yes, an area that people should look at, but to be honest with you, they don't often.
Yeah, I guess you can imagine if someone is making a move across the globe to a new place. I mean, there's so many different pieces of the puzzle that they're trying to figure
Yeah,
out. So some of these things
you,
obviously can get. I know when somebody's moving from, let's say, Toronto to Vaughan or something like that, an hour away in Canada here, they got a lot on their mind. But if you're moving across, across the ocean, there's a lot of things to consider, and these are often bottom of the list or
one
low
of the
priority.
one of the areas that is overlooked with UK people moving out of the UK, irrespective of which country they're going to, is that something called individual savings accounts, or ISAs, as we call
Okay.
them, have
Okay.
been very successful in the UK because whilst they are paid into out of after tax income, they accumulate completely tax free.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's become a very, very popular method of regular saving or lump sum saving, although it has limits at the moment. It's 20,000 a year per person. However, people move abroad, they just leave their ISA behind. I mean, that's pretty common. What they
Okay.
don't realize is that in a lot of countries, they have to declare that in the country in which they pay tax on their
Sure.
annual tax return. So they
Hmm.
have to get the capital growth and the reinvested income, and that will be taxed in the country they go to.
Hmm.
And often, if that's not declared for a period of years, they could very well face penalties for non-disclosure. But a lot of people seem to think that because it's back in the UK and is not liable for tax, they don't need to do anything about it. And I'm not saying they should necessarily encash it and move it, but they do need to be aware of the fact they have to declare that the underlying capital gain and reinvested income on their annual tax return.
It makes a lot of sense. I know in Canada here we've got something called a tax-free savings account, which sounds similar type of vehicle to what you're talking about in the UK. And I know specifically that if you're a US, if you pay US taxes but you live in Canada, they tend not to be able to hold TFSAs because most TFSA providers in Canada don't have the right reporting so that they can file the earnings on their US tax returns. So again, it's the same sort of thing, these cross-border issues. If you have to file taxes in multiple authorities, you got to make sure you've got the right reporting. You can't just pretend that doesn't exist, I guess, you know. So, excellent. Well, let's talk, changing gears a little bit over to strategies. So this is more so on the UK pensions, right? So Paul, you talked about a really nice example earlier. You've got somebody that's kind of progressed through life. Maybe they've got three or four different pension plans with a few different companies as the career has taken them. And let's say that person's now in Canada and they're trying to put together an income plan and retire. Why don't you talk about, ROPS and SIPs and how they all fit?
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, the I think this is probably um, best covered off by talking about the process. If an inquiry comes to us from somebody living overseas and they want to engage our services, then the first thing we do is complete a very detailed fact find of the client's circumstances. An essential core part of that fact find is to list their assets. And this is where we will cover exactly what they have. So they may have a personal pension, they may have a self-invested personal pension, they may have a defined contribution employer scheme or a defined benefit employer scheme, although that latter category is dying off very slowly. So we will look at all of those if there's one or more, and we will report separately on those, giving the options available that exist for that client, and particularly with a defined benefit employer scheme, it is very, very important that a full analysis of that is undertaken, if for no other reason, to ensure that if a transfer is being considered, then the transferred money has got the ability to grow in value to retirement age to provide the same level of benefits as they would have had guaranteed in the UK. So more often than not, certainly in our experience, more often than not, with a defined benefit pension scheme, we advise the client not to transfer because we can't get close to the guaranteed benefits. And then on the other schemes, it's all pretty straightforward. We will put them together, aggregate the value. We will, if it's Canada, we will send those details to Mark and his colleagues, and they will look at the most appropriate alternative pension plan in Canada, as long as it has what's called ROPS approval. And not all of them do, of course. So the strategy is a twofold one. Have a look at what the client has, analyze what the client has, very, very important. Look at the aggregate value of the funds that we consider could be successfully transferred. And then the other end of the equation is for Mark and his team to analyze that and look at what alternatives they can offer to provide the client with a viable alternative in Canada. So I think that pretty much covers off. It's a fairly simple strategy, but one other thing that is worth mentioning. I mean, I guess Mark and I and our colleagues both ends take this for granted. Part of the fact finding process is to analyze the client's attitude to investment risk. And we have a series of questions designed to produce an outcome that will tell us, broadly speaking, whether a client's a low risk investor, a moderate risk investor, or is prepared to take more risk. And Mark's and his colleagues in Canada will then try and replicate that risk strategy, but they will reproduce the process to ensure that the two things align. And importantly, whether you leave it back in the UK or it moves to Canada, that you have an advisor who will review that strategy on an annual basis. One of the differences between pension investment and other types of investment is that you look for a portfolio of funds that has long-term expectations. You're not looking at buying and selling funds on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis. You're not looking at buying and selling the underlying shares. You're looking for funds that are set up deliberately to have medium to long-term strategies as their objective. And again, Mark and his colleagues would replicate the client's attitude to risk, which again I will summarize very in a very simplified way, that somebody who wants as little risk as possible may want 70% of their investment in gilt-edged securities or cash deposits, and maybe 20 to 30% in the marketplace. Cash itself, pure cash in a bank account, is important because if one goes through a period where the markets are falling, you do not want to be encashing funds to pay your pension income. So generally, we try and get a situation we have at least 1 year's pension payments in a cash account, so we don't have to dip into the underlying funds and take a hit on their value in order to pay the income. So again, that's a second level strategy to the overall objective, if you will.
Well said, Paul. I think when we're having conversations with our Canadian clients about retiring, it's so important that we have a plan. And what I mean by a plan is understanding what is their cash flow needs, what are the income sources coming in, because we want to set up those. The term that we'd use here in Canada is called a reservoir fund. So it sort of says, hey, if we've determined that we've
Yeah.
got to pull $3,000 a month out of investments for the next, you know, 3 years based on your planning, we want to make sure that piece of the pie is in something very safe. Because the rest of the money for the next 30 years, we can have that invested in a way that's got some yield, and it may have, some years that are a little bit negative or positive, but having a few years worth of income in almost a cash position is vital. Because again, you get into a situation like a 2022 when rates were changing here in North America, markets had a tough year. You look back, let's say in 2020, originally, for the first 3 months when COVID hit, markets were challenged, right? So you want to make sure you've got some safe places to pull money when things don't look too good outside. But I love your comment earlier about a long-term philosophy. I know that um, when you're dealing with retirement income, you've got to take a pension style approach, a long-term approach, and trying to buy and sell and catch the flavor of the week or the flavor of the month or the hot tip that you heard at the golf game on the weekend is probably not the way to kind of make it work.
I do also think it's important, Mark, to mention one other thing. A lot of people are averse to investing in the stock market.
Sure.
Of course, anybody with a pension fund is invested in the stock market one way or another, whether they like it or not,
Yeah.
because whether it's a large in-house company fund or a product provider offering a range of what we call in North America mutual funds, a lot of that money will be invested in stocks and shares, and not only in the local stock exchange, but we have portfolios we manage which are in America, on the Dow Jones, on the FTSE in the UK, etc., etc. And there's an interesting statistic, which I have to say I haven't updated recently, but if you take consecutive and rolling 5 year figures from the end of the Second World War, so 45 to 50, 46 to 51, etc., 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 up to about 1980, I believe, or 1985, there were only 5 of those rolling 5 year periods where interest on deposit accounts had beaten the growth in the stock market. So the stock market long term is the right place to be for pensions, as long as you have your risk appetite matched, and as long as we both Mark and I have said you have that sinking fund in cash to pay the income when markets are falling.
Yeah, no, very, very well said, and I think my grandfather, he's passed away now, but he actually retired in 1980. And he was very fortunate in 1980 that when he retired, he had a little bit of a severance package and he was able to buy guaranteed investments, but interest rates were significantly higher than they are today. I think they
Mm.
might have been around 9 or 10 or 12%. So I think there's certain periods of time where maybe, really good interest rates made us sort of said, hey, this is a good place to
Yeah.
invest your money. But I think in our current environment, building out a really solid, diversified, balanced portfolio with stock market exposure and exposure to bonds and even alternative asset classes is probably the
Yeah.
right formula. So,
I think there's also another category we haven't touched upon yet, which has been almost invisible for the last 10 years because of low interest rates, and that's guaranteed annuities.
yeah, okay.
We are now seeing in the UK increases on guaranteed annuity rates that we haven't seen for at least 10 years.
Wow.
And the benefit, of course, with a guaranteed annuity is that whilst you give up the capital, you get a guaranteed income for the rest of your life.
Hmm.
And you can have that on a level or escalating basis. And for people who are really risk averse, and one has to respect people's own views on what they want to do with their money, an
Yeah,
annuity was always a good alternative to put their mind at rest. But
sure.
it hasn't been available as a competitive product for such a long time. And the other aspect when we're talking about pension transfers is very important. And that is that a lot of UK companies, if not the majority, will not offer an annuity to somebody who's taking their retirement and living outside the UK. So to
Interesting.
be able to transfer the whole of the value of the fund, in this case to Canada, and for Mark's team to be able to look at an annuity alternative with those funds in Canada unlocks that problem straight away.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I know we had one question about at age 75, this forced moving, purchasing an annuity with pension funds. So I guess that's what you're referring to there, Paul. So
Well, yeah, yes, there is that of course, but other people just simply want that guarantee. We don't see it that often, and it's uh, I hate saying died out. It sounds wrong in this context, but it had almost died out in the UK because the annuity rates were just awful. No
sure.
sensible advisor would recommend a client to take one.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I know there's been a little bit more a focus in marketing, but again, it's a product I think too that like one thing I've realized over time, being in financial services for just over 20 years is if the people giving the advice aren't excited about a strategy, it tends not to get implemented. So I think that it's a little bit on the
Oh,
advisors as well that sometimes the annuity is a really good product for people, and we got to put it in front of clients because it can make a lot of sense in a retirement income picture. You know,
yeah.
so,
And
um,
also there is the aspect that the regulator in the UK mandates that we must look at all alternatives for a client. We
mm,
can't pick and choose. So when we write a report, it will include the option of an annuity, even though that might be something we wouldn't recommend, just to make sure that we actually had offered every possible alternative.
Interesting. Okay, so that is again going back to our earlier comment. I think the regulatory regime is a little tighter in the UK, with these reports
It's
and stuff like
it's
that, but it's a good
it's
baseline.
very, yeah,
Yeah.
very tough regulatory environment.
So, Paul, I know we talked about the ROPS and this process of, first Alexander Beard in the UK analyzes the pensions the client has, prepares a report that has a bit of a recommendation on a transfer. If the transfer is appropriate, obviously we'd pass it over to us in Canada and we would help prepare some options to try and move the funds over. Let's talk about the self-invested personal pension or the SIP. Do you want to talk about that as an option for multiple pensions? Yeah. So,
Um, if we're in a situation where a transfer isn't appropriate for one reason or another, then a client has the opportunity to consolidate a number of funds in the UK into what we call a SIP. Now, again, there's a little bit of a misnomer here because SIPs were originally intended to cater for people who wanted much more control over the underlying investments. For example, they wanted to buy property, couldn't buy residential property, but commercial investment
oh,
property.
really?
Over the years, that's sort of metamorphosed into being more of a generic term, to be honest with you, because in the UK we have um, open investment platforms, and those platforms themselves provide the legal wrapper to meet HMRC requirements to be called a pension. But essentially, what they are is an open architecture investment platform where you can buy and sell funds.
Okay.
And the majority of SIPs now are that type of arrangement,
I
not
see.
what they were originally intended for. So really, they call them SIPs because the client can dictate where the money goes. So it's a perfectly
Mhm.
accurate description. But really, they are just a personal pension plan with a wide range of investment funds that the client can choose from. And it has to be mentioned that there are a number of online products in the UK that are HMRC approved, where a client can deal with the investment platform directly and can give instructions directly without the need of an advisor. And
Okay.
there are many people who do that, it has to be said. But thankfully for us as a business, there are far more people who want advice.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing it sounds for sure about the UK to Canada is the financial industry loves its acronyms, ROPS and SIPs and TFSAs in Canada and RSPs and all these fun things. But yeah, sometimes these titles, whoever comes up with these fun titles for these accounts, they can be a bit misleading. But the SIP sounds like an interesting option to bring a few things together there. I put down your
And
Canadian asset transfer because I assume there's probably just, also people who were in the UK that have moved to Canada that just had open investment accounts. Or you talked about that tax-free investment account. I forget what was the name of that one that's in the UK?
the ISA, the individual, there's another acronym for you, an individual savings account.
Okay. Okay. So I guess people would have those accounts and, let's say they move to Canada and, I guess maybe what's common, sometimes people would say, hey, I moved to Canada, I'm going to try it out. Maybe they get here for a few years and they're enjoying it. And so then they say, hey, I'm going to really put down roots here. So do you have any advice for people who maybe have moved to
Yeah,
Canada, still have
yeah,
these accounts? What do you think about that? Yeah.
I do. I always think that we should never be advising anybody immediately they emigrate because people change their minds.
Yeah.
And if you've gone through a lengthy and costly process of doing a pension transfer and you decide in 2 years' time that Canada, for example, is not the place for you and you want to come back home to the UK, then you're stuck.
Yeah.
So we much prefer to deal with people who have put their roots down.
Okay.
And the ISA falls neatly into that because we wouldn't recommend anybody encashes an ISA until
Mm.
they've definitely decided they're staying where they are.
Okay.
But alongside that is we can't take responsibility for it, but we can remind people is just to put it on their tax return and
Sure.
pay the tax because they can take money out of the ISA with no penalties. So if there is a tax bill to pay in Canada on their ISA in the UK at the end of the year, they can simply withdraw enough money, transfer it into their Canadian bank account and pay the tax. But again, one has dealt with both ends of that in that you've not advised the person to transfer and therefore lose the tax status, but you've taken into account the fact they will have to pay tax in Canada. When they finally put their roots down, that may be the time to encash the ISA, take the proceeds, and move it into something suitably attractive in Canada.
Yeah, no, sounds great. Thanks, Paul. Great advice there for sure. Um, Next piece I was just going to talk a little bit about was I think considerations, right? And so I think like these transfers they're not clean cut. It's there's no situation that says every time you see this you should transfer. There's always pieces of the puzzle. So um, I think it was a nice piece you just said there is probably don't want to transfer everything your first month in town. Like make sure you've set some roots. So do you want to just
Yeah.
talk to some of the considerations here, Paul? So
And age is important. because I believe I'm right in saying, Mark, that you can't transfer in to a Canadian ROPS under the age of 55.
That's correct currently. Yeah.
So just going to the previous slide about SIPs, if we find a client who is looking to transfer, they may have lived in Canada some years, but they're not yet 55, it may be a good idea to look at consolidating their different UK funds under one SIP platform so that it can be managed by us and moved at a later date. So
Fair.
age is a consideration.
Mm,
Again, you have to leave the funds for 5 years in order to meet HMRC's transfer requirements.
mhm.
That goes into tax implications. We've talked about the tax-free cash situation as well. If you're thinking of emigrating, relocating, sometimes it can be worthwhile taking the tax-free cash immediately in the UK before you leave if you're beyond the age at which that is possible. In other words, you've met the criteria so that you can take that money now. There's no question of it being taxed in Canada because you were in the UK tax system at the time. But again, that will very much depend on people's circumstances and requirements. Um, no exit taxes particularly, unless overseas transfer charges apply, and they only apply where a transfer is made to a country which does not have the necessary legal requirements in place at their end. So that wouldn't apply to Canada. But again, um, my advisors will always look at whether there's any possibility of any exit tax on the pension, but it's generally speaking um, highly unlikely.
Okay.
Regulatory maximums, no, other than um, the HMRC requirements on the value of your pension fund in the UK. The government brought in caps on pension values some years ago now. I think off the top of my head, I'm not an advisor, forgive me, but one of my colleagues will tell us, I think the cap is about 1.8 million at the moment. And anything over that, you do have a problem with tax if you're looking to transfer. So again, that is a regulatory and taxation consideration. Advisor qualifications, again, I've touched on those here in the UK. All our team have to have what's called the pension transfer qualification, which is a study course and a very tough examination at the end. And it is always noted on the regulator's website. So for clients' reassurance, they can go on the FCA website, look us up as a firm, and then they can check the credentials of each of our advisors. And
That's,
that's
I
about it,
mean,
I think, Mark.
well, it's yeah, it's very I mean, a lot of moving parts there, and I think one of the reasons that I was obviously excited about connecting with you guys and doing this work together is you guys really understand this very well. And I mean, we've spent a number of years really understanding the Canadian marketplace and making sure we've got the right options for our clients. And you guys have done the same in the international market space. And I think as people can likely see, this is a complex issue and you need to get the right advice. And it's got to be unbiased, right? Just arbitrarily saying, hey, I transfer UK pensions. You can't do that. It's got to be, we have options for the pensions and we'll educate you on the best option for you, whether that's transfer or keep in the UK, I think, so. Um, Kind of a next steps. I guess we're going to wrap it up here. We get just a few more minutes. Long and short is, obviously on our end here in Canada, myself, Andrew's another member on the team that's pretty close supporting our clients. If you have any questions specifically about your UK pension or assets in the UK and how it applies, please let us know. Just reach out to us. We're happy to kind of coordinate and help things out. Let's have a conversation. We are working with clients who have recently relocated to Canada. We've got some clients that are considering relocating to the UK, so we're having a plan with them to sort of get them set up for a potential move. And obviously, we've got the intel on the UK side through Paul and the team there. So I guess overall, I just want to say thanks everyone for listening in today. we're happy to support you with any of your finances, but specifically on UK pensions and assets. And I guess Paul, maybe a little plug, but obviously it's not even just the UK, it's pensions in America, it's pensions in Australia, right? I think, you guys do work on all the different transfers as well, right? So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
we do.
perfect. So,
Okay.
any closing words, Paul?
No, just other than thank you very much for attending the session. I hope you found it useful. Is there any way people can type or ask questions before we finish, Mark?
Yeah, there is a chat box there. If somebody wants to pop something into a chat, if there are any questions, feel free to do so. I'm pretty sure it's open. I wouldn't say I'm a webinar expert here, so hopefully I've made it open and available. I'll put a quick note in here. So.
Can't see anything.
Oh, that's obviously I don't know how to type. That was supposed to be box. Here's a chat box. So if anyone had any questions, I've popped them in. And if for whatever reason maybe it's not coming to mind, well, thanks, Roger. If for any reason anyone has any questions and they happen to pop into your heads after we're off the call, feel free to send us a quick email and we could answer them or jump on a call and kind of go
Yeah,
from there. You know.
yeah. A couple of people have actually put some stuff on the chat
Yeah,
saying thank you very much. Very informative, great session. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
yeah, thanks for the feedback,
Okay.
Yeah, we're all wrapping up. So thanks very much. And Paul, thanks for signing in. I know it's a bit later in the
Not
day
at all.
for
It's my
you.
pleasure. My
And
pleasure.
yeah, we look forward to keeping in touch. And we're going to have some future webinars as well on the UK topics. So stay tuned and we'll talk soon. So
Great. Thank you, everybody. Good
thanks
night.
very much. See ya.